All right, I'm Casey Williams. I did want to clarify, I'm not an ag guy. I'm from Valley City State University. Everybody else was from UND, NDSU, all the ag places. I'm a fisheries biologist that teaches at the college. But I have a high tunnel and I love to grow stuff. And so the reason they invited me is because they knew I've made every mistake in the book in a high tunnel, and I can tell anybody that's interested what not to do. So couple things real quick. High tunnel, mine's a little bit different than this setup here, because generally with a high tunnel it's meant to roll the sides or raise the sides to keep it a little cool, because I don't know if you can tell probably from my sweat marks, it's awful hot in here, and it could stand to be a little bit cooler because based on the photosynthesis rate and respiration rate of plants, once they get too hot, they're really just making a living. They're not actually storing any energy. But as you can see, everything in here is doing really well. Over here on this one side, you have okra, which if you're a southerner like me, you love okra, and you know that it grows well with heat and with water, right? And so okra does really, really well in a high tunnel. There's carrots next to it. Here's some sweet corn. Had a great crop of sweet corn last year. We grew half of our high tunnel in sweet corn. Our high tunnel is 80 feet, 75 feet long by 30 feet wide. And so half of it we planted because we wanted to get the crop out of there early, so then we could plant it with a cover crop of different types of turnips to kind of replace some of those nutrients there. It grows really well. You can see you probably won't find any other sweet corn around that's that tall this time of the year. So we had an extremely early crop last year, and it looks like they'll be picking corn here before long. Here's cilantro. I don't know, are y'all fans of cilantro? Oh, yeah, I could smell it when I walked in. I love it. So over here we have tomato plants, and actually, if y'all want to come in, I want to show y'all this system they have. It's okay if I move right over here? So this is something that we started a couple of years ago, because when you grow tomatoes in a high tunnel, by the end of the summer, before you get that first freeze, they'll be 9 feet tall. And so when you have a 9 foot tall tomato plant that's got tomatoes all the way up, they get so top heavy that you can't keep them upright. And so this was our answer. We built a trellis system that's 20 feet wide, and it runs the length of our high tunnel, or 60 feet, almost the length of our high tunnel. And then we stretch steel cable, 3/16" cable across the top of it. And we have something very similar to this. I have one in the box over there to show you. Basically what we do is we have these droppers hanging down 8 feet up, and we run our string down, and we use these tomato clips. If you've never seen them before, they actually clip and lock on the string, and you clip them under a branch, and it holds your tomato plant up. And so that way you don't have to try to stake them or anything like that. You just have to go out and make sure they're clipped. So see, you would clip this here again, and it holds it on that string. And then you don't have to worry about anything. Then all the weight is on your trestle that you built. It's worked out great. That's a huge thing that we learned after 3 years of trying to keep tomato plants upright, and now we never have to worry about them anymore. We also use this system with cucumbers, because now there's no bending over to pick cucumbers. You just stand up and pick them, and they grow up. Tomato plants and cucumbers, they'll grow 8 feet to the top, and then they go over our 2x4 structure, and they come down, and then you use these clips and train them coming back down the other way, so they're not putting all the weight where it'll drop or break it off the top there. So huge, huge benefit to setting up. That would work outside. Very easy to do outside too. If you just bury a post in the ground and put your 2x4 across, and you can run your you probably have to put a brace down on each side, but run your wires across, and then you've got this instant system. You don't have to tie up tomatoes or anything like that on a stake like we always did before.
Excuse me, Casey.
Yes, ma'am.
Determinate tomatoes?
I like indeterminate tomatoes. I really like old heirloom tomatoes, and just because that's where the flavor is at. The newer tomatoes, I mean, we grow some in the high tunnel that are made for high tunnel production. And they do really well, and they're good tomatoes, but there's nothing like a Cherokee Purple or Brandywine tomato. And I was happy to hear, because I gave this talk last year, so after my recommendations, that's what they did. They planted Cherokee Purple, so I can't wait till they actually get to try some of them, because pretty sure that's the best tomato that's ever made right there, is Cherokee Purple. Down here we have a drip irrigation system, and so basically the way I plant my garden or my high tunnel is in the spring I make raised beds, and then I cover that with a black plastic mulch, and then we'll plant through that mulch. But before we plant the mulch down, we'll put 1 or 2 of these, depending on the crop, down the center of each row, and then each one of these has a valve on the end of it. And that way, if we have tomatoes need a certain amount of water. If you get too much water, then you'll crack them. They don't need as much water as cucumbers do when they're growing. And so that way you can control every different type of plant you have. And then right over here, oh, I don't trip backwards there. And so I use one of these to gauge my water level in the soil. This is called an aerometer. And so you place this in the soil and you fill it with distilled water. You put a suction on it so there's a vacuum here. And this is a ceramic tip. Depending on how much soil moisture is available, it gives you a reading here. So if it's, and you can't see this, and I'll tell you why, because it's all clouded up. But if it's 0, that means your soil is saturated or more, which you don't really want to get it saturated because that's when your tomatoes will crack. But you can watch it, and as this dial goes up, it means your soil is becoming more and more dry. And so generally I like to keep mine between like the numbers 5 and 30 on here. I'm not sure what that means, but it works for me. I'm not even sure what the units are. But these are about $80 a piece. Once you buy them, then they last a long time, unless you leave them out and let them freeze. And then they don't work anymore. That's why I can't read mine. So if you invest in these, keep them. The way I set my high tunnel up, I have all my tomatoes. I have 4 rows of tomatoes, so half the high tunnel, 3 half rows, and another half row. And then I've got 1 aerometer for tomatoes. That's in one spot, and I monitor I basically assume that all my water levels throughout the tomato rows are the same as the one that I'm monitoring with that. Then I have peppers. There are a couple rows of those. I assume they're all. I have 1 aerometer for those and 1 aerometer for my cucumbers. And then I also planted watermelons this year, cantaloupes, Crenshaw melons, and winter squash. And they're all on, my watermelons are on the ground. Everything else I'm running on this trellis system. And so we'll see how that works. I bought onion sacks to support my melons and everything because that's a lot of weight. It's an experiment. If I can grow some good melons, again, being from Louisiana, I actually grew up on a watermelon farm. And so there's nothing I love more than a watermelon. So we're going to see how that works out.
So the water requirements for all of those different vegetables, you say between 5 and 30.
Yes.
And it's not a good idea to move those around. You pretty much.
You can move them, but the problem is this ceramic tip has to be in contact with the soil. And so every time you pull it out, it wallers the hole out. So then you have to punch another hole and do it again and again. And it's just, to me, it was easier. Just you buy 3 of them, you place them where they need to be, and then you don't have to touch them again for the rest of the year. So it's convenience.
Yeah.
And
water requirement for all those different plants would be in that range.
Yes. And that's the way I do it. I don't know if that's technically right. Again, I'm a fisheries guy, but it works for me, and it's worked for a couple years doing that. I know there's enough water there, but you can saturate the soil in the tomatoes and the cucumbers the same day. The next day, there'll still be 2 times as much water in the tomatoes as in the cucumbers, especially this time of year when they're growing and they're producing a lot of cucumbers. They take up so much water. And so that lets you keep an eye on everything. Let's see. So tomato clips, we talked about those. Another beautiful thing that I discovered last year that I had never used before, and I'll show you this. So they have the wheels, and then this is what I use. These are a little bit cheaper, and so when you set your string depth the first time in the spring, and then you just clip them to your tomatoes, and you just work all the way up it. These, and I cannot remember what these are called right now, but when you grow these tomatoes in high tunnels, they will be completely loaded down. And this example right here, so you see there's 1, 2, 3 blooms on this one little limb, and I believe this is some kind of heirloom. It may be a Brandywine. Well, you get 3 big tomatoes growing there, and it's going to break that little branch off. What this is used for is you hook it on the stronger part of that stem, and then this snaps to your string and holds it. So it takes all the weight off of that plant and puts it on the string so it doesn't break your plants off. This was a lifesaver because, like I said, when they really get loaded down, you can get in, well, you end up breaking them off before they get ripe.
Where do you get that, Casey?
I ordered these from Johnny's Selected Seeds. And I tried them last year. I ordered 100 of them. They worked so well. 2 days ago, I ordered 500 more because I also use them on,
Your heavy vines.
yep, and on the bell peppers because they'll load down and they'll just split their limbs. Well, we've got those running on this trellis system too. And so these are real easy. Instead of clipping everything, you just take these, hook a vine or hook a plant, and then sit it right there, and it keeps it from breaking the peppers off or the limbs off.
Are you supposed to snip off all those branches that don't have anything on them?
I do. So I'm a heavy pruner of my tomatoes. And the reason for that, for years, we would have tons and tons of tomatoes, nothing would ever get ripe. And so after doing some research, it's because we weren't pruning them. Our tomato bush, this tomato bush would have been this big around. Lots of tomatoes, 9 feet tall, and we hadn't picked a tomato off of it yet. Well, what it was doing, it was suckering, and every time it suckers, all your energy goes into that, and so we started pruning it. So now I keep one main stem on my tomatoes. Now sometimes it will fork, not from a sucker, but it'll just naturally fork, and I'll leave both forks on there, but I'll pull off every sucker off of my tomato plants, and it's made a world of difference. It's made a ton of difference. So now my tomato plants are about this tall, and they don't have any suckers on them, and they've got tomatoes starting about here all the way to the top. So tomatoes up about that big around now, all over the tomato plants.
So does that depend on variety as far as doing the suckers?
So for indeterminate tomatoes, you don't want to prune those, I don't believe, because they're just going to make and then all go at one time. With the indeterminate, yeah, I definitely prune those, because if not, like I said, they just every sucker will sucker and sucker and sucker. So you lose a lot of your energy into that.
I just went through this trying to figure out how to prune tomatoes, and they said to take about a foot up from the bottom. That discourages, splashing or diseases on the bottom.
Yes.
But I was lost as far as, okay, and the suckers, but where else do you go?
Okay, so I'm a firm believer in having leaves on your tomato plants. I see some pictures where there's very little leaves, and I'm just like, how does it even make any energy, right? And so what I do is I don't prune the leaves. All I prune is the suckers in the high tunnel. The difference is if you're growing them outside, you've got water splashing on them and soil splashing on them. That's where they get disease from. I don't have that issue with my drip irrigation system. So if it were outside, then I would clip off like these bottom leaves here. I wouldn't want anything touching the ground. And I would take other than that, I wouldn't prune, because if you look at this one, and if you pruned off this sucker and this sucker and this sucker and this sucker, here's some little suckers coming on, here's another sucker. This is a big runaway sucker. So you would have this one going up, and then it forked right here, so really you would only have 2 stems running up. And you'd still have lots of leaves on it without those suckers.
Well, we also break off the tops.
Do you break off? Now, I tell you when I break off the tops, in about middle of September, because then I want everything to go into getting those last fruits right before they freeze. But I let them grow until then. And again, you're growing outside?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the difference is inside they grow so quickly and make so much fruit. Yeah, until the end of the year, I don't have to do that.
Well, we box ours in cages that are made out of cattle panels, and then they hang in there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then they keep on growing on top, and they won't get ripe. So you.
Oh yeah,
off the
yeah.
tops.
That's right. That's right. And basically, that's what I'm doing. You cut the tops, and that way they quit growing the leaf material, and it all goes into fruit production.
And this year I planted mine too early, and they all sold off.
Oh. Well, I tell you what I do. So you're supposed to be safe early in the high tunnel, but in North Dakota with the winds that we get, because mine's out in the wide, we have protection from the north, but not from the south. And so when you get a 40-mile-an-hour south wind, I can't keep the wind out of it. And if it's, you know, a hard freeze, it kills everything. So I start all of my plants from seed, and then I plant plenty of them. And that way I'll get some in the garden early when I think they're probably going to freeze. But if they don't, I get early tomatoes. And then if they do, I just replant them. That's the way I look at
The
it.
right idea.
Yeah. And then
Does that extend your season too in the fall? Yes?
it depends on how hard the freezes are. And so last year, our season ended, we got that a couple hard freezes in October, and that wiped everything out. That killed everything in the high tunnel because it froze every night. And it was like cloudy, and so we never got to high tunnel. It never heated up during the day enough to hold that energy in, and so we lost everything early. Generally in a high tunnel though, by the time you lose it, you're glad for it to be gone because it takes up so much of your time and it's so much work to do. And so I'm always happy when it freezes. I threaten to leave it open. My wife doesn't like that. But they've got, again, watermelons. The peppers, I started actually pruning those this year. I've never done that before. But for bell peppers, again, by the end of the year, there'll be huge plants and a bunch of small bell peppers on them. And because the same way, they sucker, they fork so much. So this year, at every fork, I cut off the weak side. And that way, I've just got 2 main stems coming up. And each one of those has its own string and supported by these tomato clips. So we're going to see how that works. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Casey, you have any trouble with like mosaic virus or?
Not so far. I never have. I don't know how I've been able to avoid it. But it.
Especially the heirlooms.
I know, and I worry every year. Last year I had green shoulder. I'd never had an issue with that before, where the tomato is completely ripe except for the shoulders on the top, and it's green. And I thought, well, it's not that bad, you know. But then you cut it, and it's like a rock. It's really hard. Well, I did some research, and it's because it got hot and it stayed hot. It never cooled off, and I believe it's keratin that they are not able to produce during that time. And so the only change I made last year, like I said, I roll my sides up every day. And I had the ends open, but the problem with the ends being open with that south wind, when it blows through, it'll knock everything down. It just whips everything. So I put permanent ends, and then I installed a door to go inside, and I thought, well, the sides, having them open this high will be enough. And it wasn't, because you'd go out there on a day like today, and I've got 2 thermometers in there. They go to 120 degrees, and it would be topped out where it couldn't go any further. And I think that's what got me last year. So now I've got little horse doors that I haven't installed yet. I've been trying to get to it where I can, if the wind's not too bad, I can open them up on each end. Because really, if you have wind, the sides being open is enough to cool it off. But if you have a still day, which is not very common in North Dakota, but when you do and it's sunshiny, then that's when everything just scalds in there. And
What degree shade are they running?
I have no idea. I have no idea, because mine's wide open. I don't have a shade cloth on mine.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Has it ever happened to you when you grow bell pepper that they start flowering when they're still very tiny plants?
Yes.
Do you put them out?
I prune them off. I prune them off, because if not, that just slows it down. I want them to get, I like them about that big before I leave a bloom on them.
Right.
Yep, and that's when I start doing it.
All right.
Yeah.